Right, I'm delighted to hand over to Pat Kane.
Thank you so much, Guy. My presentation today is called Play and Power, and I think I want to kind of do something. I'm a real creativity and innovation, but primarily play aficionado and advocate. I think play is in a kind of fundamental place when we talk about creativity and innovation in organizations, society, politics, technology, or anything else. And I like its elementality. So I'm also aware that it's been quite difficult for me to be a creative thinker at this point in this place in Europe and in relation to the last 2 years. So a little bit of that is going to, a little bit of the kind of the world of power politics and contestation is going to impinge on our discussion. Just let me tell you who I am. I wrote a book in 2004 for Macmillan called The Play Ethic, a manifesto for a different way of living. And from that, I went on to basically be interested in not just playgrounds, but the grounds of play. What are the conditions? What are the structures? What are the organizations? What are the occasions that support play and playfulness? So I became a curator for an organization called Nesta, setting up something called Future Fest, which does what it says on the tin. It's a festival about the future. And then I also was involved in something called Unboxed, which is a big £120 million celebration of creativity in the UK. And also for my sins, I remain a member of the 80s UK pop band Hue and Cry. I'm gigging this weekend and I like to play that way too. Now, here's the structure of my presentation. I'm going to try to be as brisk as possible, hopefully as clear as possible. This may be a majority American audience, so if you listen to me, think Craig Ferguson and Billy Connolly, and it should be all right, hopefully. But here's the three sections I'm going to break this presentation on play and power into. 1, play as a superpower. 2, play as a tool of power or power elites. And 3, play points beyond power, or at least their current conceptions of power. That's a picture from the famous 60s book, Play Power by Richard Neville. Some of you may know it. First, play as a superpower. Play is a power of itself. I have been, since I wrote the book in 2004, bending more and more towards the most powerful description and explanation for play being that comes from evolutionary theory. And I partly do that because I'm really interested in understanding of human creativity and dynamism that sits at the basis of our human nature or our species being. It isn't affected or pulled this way or that way by management or creative or organizational trends. It's something that's a part of us as a species, and not only us as a species, but us primarily as a species. So I read a book in 1997 called The Ambiguity of Play by the educationalist Brian Sutton Smith. And he has what, it'll sound clunky to begin with, but I think it's the most beautiful and profound definition of what play is. And he called play adaptive potentiation. I'll just say that again because it's quite a mouthful. Adaptive potentiation. What does he mean by adaptive potentiation? Well, his strict sense is that play serves our need for flexibility for us as organisms. We need to break out of evolutionary niches that become too rigid or become exhausted, or there is a change in the people that we're relating with and we need to move away from them or towards other people. And play is the thing that helps us to be as flexible as we've needed to be as social animals over the last 100,000 years. And play is the manifestation of that flexibility. And the other thing I love about adaptive potentiation is that it says that all the things that we, from the Puritan legacy that we've criticized about play, that play is excessive, it's too experimental, it's trivial, it's just a performance, is actually adaptive, because what play is, as adaptive potentiation, is an imaginative rehearsal for reality. And there's a lovely piece by a guy called Michael Connor, who wrote a book called The Evolution of Childhood. And he begins his chapter on play by saying, surely play is maladaptive. Surely it's costly. Surely it wastes energy. Surely it opens us up to being preyed on by animals. Why are we doing this expenditure of energy, this process of vulnerability? And the point is that it's adaptive because it's capability enhancing. It helps us complex creatures to live with other complex creatures. It gives us a rehearsal space for complexity. It resources our complexity. It's a bit like sleep and dreams and a bit like sex. It's a reward for empathy, complexity, and sensitivity. So I not only like that as a scientific description, I think it's quite attractive too. And one of the things I've certainly noticed since I wrote the book in 2004, and that's coming up for 20 years, is that the news about play as a turbocharger of well-being and performance just gets stronger and stronger, and it becomes more and more robust and better substantiated. This is just a clip from the BBC Future. And again, if you want to see this presentation with all the hot links in it, please go to patkane.global, and then just the keynote page. But this is from BBC Future, 4th of February, just a month or two ago. Why playing games is good for you. And here's the paragraph. Adults who demonstrate more playful personality traits are more motivated, creative, and spontaneous. It can help you lower your blood pressure. If you struggle in your leisure time to relax, you're often feeling bored, whereas if you're playfully inclined, you're aware of new opportunities and you're open to trying a wider variety of initiatives. So I call play a power and maybe even a superpower because it is so deeply rooted and increasingly becoming in a cross-disciplinary way in terms of evolutionary theory, neuroscience, cognitive science, more and more substantiated. This is a little bit of nerding out on my part, but I'm noticing in the mind science community that there's a bit of a fierce debate about the science of emotions. It's between the constructionists on one side, which is Lisa Feldman Barrett, and the essentialists on the other side, which is Jaak Panksepp and what they call affective neuroscience. It's a sort of an interesting debate. I won't go into it, but the fascinating thing about both positions is that they both see play as a necessary zone of development in the human condition, not wasteful, not paradoxical, but actually experiment that we need for our human vitality. So even in the midst of quite a tough and quite a bitter debate about paradigms, both of these tendencies validate and valorize play as a kind of a way to keep us going as a flexible organism. And then just one last definition on play, just to remind people, play is bigger than game. Play is the big circle in which the small circles exist. And here's just a few examples of play that you probably recognize, but certainly from the biology and the psychology, big support for bodily and social rough and tumble. I'll talk about an article I just read by Jonathan Haidt on this later on in the presentation. Play also as reflexive role play. I mean, whether that's children playing their part or us playing our part on the organizational stage, a big part of play. Playing just with materials, playing with stuff, putting it together, whether it's in Lego or montage or bricolage or fabrics or a creative IDEO method. We often do just play with materials to see what the possibilities are. Formal games, obviously the case, but these can be finite games, win games, win-lose games, and infinite games, win-win games. So there's some interesting distinctions there, even in terms of the dominance of games in the way that we talk about play. Even within games, there are different kinds of games to be thinking about. And obviously here I am being quite conceptual, being quite linguistic, being quite symbolic. I think we have that form of play as well, and we should value it as much as we value the play that is sort of rejuvenating play, or even sometimes rejuvenile play that comes from tapping into the constitutive role, the forming role of play in our early years and our childhood years. That's important, but also we're adult players as well, and we use adult tools and we play in adult ways. Okay, so that's my sense of play as a superpower. It's sort of like we are the meta animal. I think Jim talked about sapience before. We are the sapient animal. Play makes that sapience fun and enjoyable and adaptive by increasing our options. Now, just to kind of, I want to go to the second section because I want to talk a wee bit about play as a tool of power, or maybe a tool of power elites. I'm very, very struck by this over the last couple of months. I try not to read too much current affairs because it destroys my mood, but it's sort of been to some degree unavoidable. You'll recognize many of these pictures. There's the storming of the Capitol at the top and Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights at the bottom. There's two premiers who like to play the ancient disruptive character of Loki. That's Donald Trump and also Mr. Johnson. I think we if we look around us in the current in our current affairs and the public sphere, I think we're watching authority playing with our reality. I think there's no doubt that that's something that's been picked up. The posh name for it is political technologists, but the old name for it is creative propaganda. But it's happening. We are being played with. Our reality is being played. Worlds of coherent worlds are being constructed in order for malefactors to advance on territories or on situations that they want to change. And I think we have to be honest about the power of play in that respect. It has a light and a dark aspect. Here's another aspect. I just wrote an article about this for my Substack, patkane.substack.com. We're looking at the fueling ideology for Putin's invasion of Ukraine and his maneuvers in that area. It's Russian traditionalism and Eurasianism, so I thought I would go and find out about it. There's the two characters at the top, Vladimir Surkov and Alexander Dugin. So Surkov and Dugin, I discovered, are reading all my favorite playful postmodern philosophers, and they give them the greatest respect. Why? Because they say that reality is a construction that can be played with. And what are these Russian ideologists doing with that? They're constructing new norms and worlds, which is what play fabulously does for us as human beings. It allows us to imagine different worlds, but they're constructing new norms and worlds that, for example, police difference. That's a picture of Putin in drag, which is banned officially from the Russian territory. So play is light and fantastic, play is dark and terrifying, and that's what it is as adaptive potentiation. It's getting human beings ready for other human beings' complexities, which can be dark or light. It's just another aspect of play as a tool of power is, without a doubt, the games culture and the games industry. The statistics on this, which I just looked up, are incredible. The rate of increase of gamers globally is incredible, from 182 billion in 2014 to 29 billion in 2021. Huge global market, $175 billion global market, the biggest entertainment industry. But again, it's not as if discussions about play don't easily turn into political or even civilizational debates. We had Mr. Zuckerberg declaring that we were all about to be living in a metaverse, a kind of game-driven next stage internet. Some call it the Zuckerverse, rudely. So that was his declaration. Within the same news cycle, the Chinese state authorities looked at the same set of playful simulatory game spaces and called it, quote unquote, spiritual opium. But it's the same technologies of play, digital play and creativity that both were referring to. I've also noticed when I look at Web3, which is the kind of portmanteau term for crypto, for NFTs, for smart DAOs and smart digital organizations, play game is the mode and mood of that. And I think that's a consequence of a generation of gamers who have gone into play games, have seen that they can play with currencies, they can play with social structures, they can play with psychologies, and they're taking that play game sensibility, which I think is built up over a number of decades, and they're beginning to apply it to the real world to try to make structures for themselves in the present, because the future looks in many ways quite tough and challenging. So why not create your currency? Why not create your organization that sits underneath the mainstream, because the mainstream is not offering you many options to move, but the mood and the mode of it is playful and gameful, which I think is really interesting. Again, this isn't all, so that I'm trying to pass from the dark to the middle to the light. I think progressives, if you want to be described under that label, can also use play as a tool of power. Some of you may recognize this image. This is called the planetary boundaries map, but the popular name for it is donut economics. The donut is the gap between the planetary climatic limits that we can't cross, otherwise we're in dire straits. The gap between that and a sort of satisfying socioeconomic norm. And the challenge is that we should be able to live in the gap between the socioeconomic norm and the planetary biosphere boundaries. To me, it looks like a game, right? I think that looks like a target or a toy. On either side of the blob in the middle, just interestingly, is on the left, America, on the right, Denmark, which is quite surprising because the Scandinavians are supposed to be way ahead. In the middle, which seems to have an efficacious balance, is Vietnam. So that's an example of what I think is actually quite a play-like, toy-like method, helping us to kind of steer the planet through the darkness of space in a sustainable way. But I think it definitely has a playful element, and it's an example of play being used as a tool to effect change. So some big claims here. I think I'm absolutely quite convinced of this. I think that the lesson of the remainder of the 21st century is that we are both, and I think this really gets down to something essential about human social nature, even about civilization, is that human beings are players within boundaries, and those boundaries can be planetary boundaries or social boundaries. And we are also players beyond boundaries. You know, we are setting off exponential processes from our ingenuity or from our innovation or from our technology. They may or may not lead to a singularity, which then just goes straight off the chart. And I just want to raise ambitions here. I think one of the questions about thinking about the power of play, or power and play, is that how do we organize and build ourselves for a sapient humanity that dances with the precipice? And I'm sure I don't need to emphasize the news points that might prove that we are indeed at the moment dancing with, not just dancing on, but I think often dancing with the precipice. I'm glad I'm talking to an American audience. Seems like mostly, if not, I apologize for that typification, but you'll probably recognize the famous quote from Stuart Brand, the technologist and environmentalist, which started in 1968 as "we are as gods and we might as well get good at it." And he changed it in 2009 when environmental concerns were beginning to peak to say "we are as gods and we have to." I think it's also "we must get good at it." And again, just from my interest in evolutionary theory, there's a concept in evolutionary theory called exaptation. What does exaptation mean? Well, it's a function that started out as one thing and is to be used for something else. The classic example is the feather from a bird, a feather from a dinosaur that was initially used for cooling down the animal, and then through various awesome processes of evolution became an instrument for flight. So the feather was exapted from being an insulation tool or a cooling tool to being a flying tool. I wonder if play is currently being exapted, by which I mean it was once a kind of rehearsal space for reality, but now playfulness or playing is constituting the reality itself. So the as if element of play is becoming more and more manifest, particularly technologically. I would even be tempted to say we're in a moment of super play where dreams and fantasies can be translated into realities, both, again, according to the worse or the better angels of our nature. So I think just to kind of raise this ambition really high in World Creativity and Innovation Week, is I think we have to improve the quality of our playful imaginations. We have to make them more systemic, maybe more biospheric, certainly more complex, more feminine rather than more masculine, another discussion. No matter what, I think the world is in play, and players are playing on us and inviting us to play with them and play against them. So I think this issue and this topic of a higher quality playing imagination is quite urgent. And now I want to just slightly freak you out towards the end and talk about play pointing beyond power, or at least our current idea of power. And by that, I mean sort of power elites and politics. that image is an AI dreaming of something. And I'll come to the AI bit in a minute. But what do I mean by play pointing beyond power? One of the beautiful things about Brian Sutton Smith's book, Ambiguity of Play, is he divides play into two epochs, as it were, or modalities. One is the ancient form of play, and one is the modern form of play. So modern form of play is play as education, play as freedom, play as self-development. The ancient forms of play are the gods playing with you, you surrendering yourself to the play of the universe, whether you're a religious devotee or a gambler. Play that's about being part of a community, and you're slightly coerced to be part of that festivity, to join that community. So I think this is I'm definitely really interested in ancient play, and there's no doubt that being in play, which you could say is to be in a kind of joyful, exultant process with the world or the cosmos, is a very, very old, a perennial spiritual religious tradition. Just a few here, but there's the Hindu idea of Leela, which is basically that the everyday world and the absolute are in effortless play with each other. There's the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher Heraclitus. Time is a game played beautifully by children. I think the other phrase on that is that the aeon is a child with coloured balls playing by the shore. And then, Zen Buddhism, there's a famous quote from Alan Watts, the great Western advocate of Zen Buddhism. This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you're doing in the here and now, and instead of calling it work, realize that it is play. So that can also work ecologically. I mean, I think one of the things about our mammalian heritage of play is that it's connecting us ecologically to the planet and its biosphere. So there are strong arguments, and the Atlantic magazine had an article by Jonathan Haidt, which made a very, very strong case that kids' natural free play can make them stronger citizens. It can help them figure out how to negotiate with others. It can make them more capacious and more tolerant and less nervy and debate-oriented, which is the consequence of being too much on digital media. So I think that there's a way in which thinking about evolved play, mammalian play, can give us a link to a kind of biophilic consciousness, which is the great E.O. Wilson phrase, love of nature consciousness. I think we can get at that through thinking about natural play. But, play is adaptive potentiation, and potentiation means considering everything. And I think one of the things that we have to consider is that one next stage of evolution is going to be towards artificial intelligence, or certainly non-human intelligences of various kinds. And one of the ways they're getting there is through play. I'll just show you a very, very quick, I think hopefully just a 30 seconds of this clip here. There's no real sound to it, but this is a DeepMind intelligent agent, self-teaching AI, playing games in order to make itself more capable in the real world. So they're playing hide and seek, they're playing a whole range of different kinds of games. But the point is that the advance of artificial intelligence, which you could regard as maybe the next stage of evolution on the planet, is not happening through terrifying Robbie the robots, but it's happening through scenarios like this: entities playing their way, as human organisms and other mammalian organisms do, playing their way to mastery, competence, self-determination. And I'm just interested in this in terms of how we relate to it as humans. Mo Gaudat brought out a great book called Scary Smart. He's an ex-Google and DeepMind executive. Asked us to think of AIs as our children. What are we teaching them? Are we teaching them to do wars, to gamble, to expropriate? We have to be teaching them better than that. And I think the final point I want to end on really is, what happens when they'll start to teach us? And this is what I mean by getting into a different idea of power through play. Some of you may have seen DALL-E 2, which is a intelligent software where you basically speak your request into the software and it generates images. For example, generating images like animal helicopter, chimeras split between two creatures. This is some examples of this. This is quite trite, but some of it is incredible in terms of the way it mixes together old masters and new memes quite quite extraordinary. So that's one thing. And then the other thing we need to be alert to is not just artificial intelligence, but artificial consciousness. A guy called Mark Solms and a neuroscientist called Antonio Damasio are currently doing experiments with embodied robots that, because they're embodied, will generate feelings, and that feeling will generate a kind of consciousness. Now, the question is, if that's what our deep play and ingenuity is leading us to, which is possibly a singularitarian moment, how are we to be? How should we be? And one of the things that Mark Solms makes in his fantastic recent book called The Hidden Spring is he talks about the as-if nature of play is the basis of empathy. And he talks about the 60-40 rule, that when people are playing, it doesn't go, the balance of power cannot go over 60 dominant, 40 submissive. Easy, but even better if it goes to 50-50. When you cross the line on that, it stops being play with anger, fear, and lust, and it starts being anger, fear, and lust. And that's something that Mark, who is also involved in creating this artificial consciousness, is observing about play in mammalian and human nature. So play maybe has an enormous role. And this is my last suggestion, is that it may have a role that it can teach these new coming artilects, is one way for them, or digital artificial companions. It will be able to teach them how to live with the difference of the world. And it will do that by making uncertainty fun and enjoyable. And making uncertainty fun and enjoyable is one of the oldest definitions of play. And I'm quite excited that it looks like it's going to be relevant to one of our most advanced and oncoming challenges. And I think that, just finally, is a request to DALL-E, DALL-E 2, for an image that splits Salvador Dali between a real Dali and a robot Dali. Make of it what you will. If you want to see these slides, which are full of useful and interesting hot links, please go to my keynotes page at PatKane.global. And thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Pat. Thank you. Questions, observations, thoughts? Stunned silence.
Stunned silence. I was expecting stunned silence is what I usually get, to be quite honest.
So quick question from me, if I may, is
sure.
What's getting in the way then, in a sense, of things like play and creativity and imagination?
Well, this is partly my point, Guy, is that I think things are opening up to play actually in a really profound, deep and structural way. And I think the key quote in the presentation is the Stuart Brand quote. You know, we are as gods and we must get good at it. And I think that what's happening is that the mainstream is shifting. I mean, I thought it's extraordinary that when Facebook changed its name to Meta, which is about as big a change as you can get in the world and the business world, right? A complete rebranding of a major organization. Could have called itself anything. Could have called itself Rainbow or Sunbeam or Regeneration. Called itself Meta. And play is the thing that in human nature makes us meta. It gives us the capacity to generate new realities, to frame them in a different way, to live with risk without risk damaging us. And one of the biggest companies in the world decided to basically claim that as a term. Now, I think sometimes things are in plain sight. And sometimes I think that when people have ambitions for things, we should call them out. So I think that there is an awareness that, and I think a lot of things have made us aware of that. To some degree, 3 generations of gaming, to some degree, the digital revolution, which made everybody into a publisher and an editor and a composer. But also COVID, and also climate change, and also the story from technology, is that we're either going to use play as a master skill, or it's going to be used against us by people who have a lot of money and a lot of skill and a lot of interest of in shaping our worlds and simulating plausible and beautiful worlds within which we can live for their profit and benefit. So it's funny. I think I don't know whether it's myself being the classic problem with the guy who sees a nail everywhere and just has to hammer the nail in. Maybe I'm overstating the elemental challenge of play at the moment, but I think it is elemental, because I think powerful forces, some of them positive, some of them negative, are realizing the power of play and game and simulation, and are challenging us as citizens, as human beings, I think, as the first presentation said, to come up with countervailing powers. You know, what are the playful institutions? What are the organizations and institutions that would respond to our sense of play that we could build? I mean, to some extent, 10 years ago, I would have said, you know, we're moving into the positive play organized world, open source, agile. You know, that maybe towards the end of the 90s, there was a utopianism about the internet as a kind of play space, as an innovation commons, as Lon Slezak once called it. And I think there was a bit of a counter action to that early vision of the internet as the infrastructure for a playful civilization. So I think we have to pick it up again. I think to some degree the Web3 kids are picking it up again. I think they're actually being, one way to look at them is filthy speculators. Another way to look at them is that they're boldly trying to create structures that are parallel to the structures that have not served us really pretty badly financially and even ecologically over the last sort of 10, 15 years. So I turn your question back to, I actually think we need to raise our play ambitions rather than force the case for play.
Thank you. As you were talking, my sense was we all need to sort of perhaps wake up a little bit more to it.
Yeah.
And be more aware of it around us, perhaps.
Yes.
We've got a question from Ritu. Ritu, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Hi, yes. Thank you so much for your share, and thank you everybody that's here and that's shared. This has been amazing. You know, you spoke about AI and you spoke about the empathy, and I am a teacher of little ones, and so I'm very conscious of making sure that it's positive things that are being shown, as you shared about violence and things of that nature. It just, whatever we put in our mind is what we create in our reality, right? And from that perspective, how can we support that at a deeper level in I don't want to say making people conscious, but in promoting awareness for our children and for society at large of focusing on things and using play as that medium that you spoke about, or that vehicle to really bring in a beautiful world into our world.
Sure. That's a great question. Thank you so much, Ritu. I'm involved in something in Scotland called Upstart Scot, and they have a very simple headline for their campaign: play-based 3 to 7 kindergarten now. That's it. And it's backed up by so much research. It's backed up by so much neuroscience and psychology and sociology about how important it is to have kids in that crucial formative zone. Be playing with objects, be playing with each other before we get to formal lessons. In fact, it's just counterproductive. If we want to create really capable, adaptive, creative, smart young citizens, we follow the nature and teach them and educate them at that stage in this way. Now, I'm not a Luddite about technology. I think Mo Godat, who I quoted, the Google expert, said, you know, if these technologies of big data and machine learning and alternative intelligence as well as artificial intelligence, if these are our children, we are teaching them and bringing them up so badly. We're getting them to exploit, gamble, conduct war, expropriate. So there's a mindful revolution that has to go on, certainly in Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of people who are sort of pushing that forward. I think there's an increasing amount of pressure on the tech platforms to be thinking in a humanistic way and to be thinking about, I mean, and of course, maybe the simple news is how much do tech moguls limit their children's access to technology when they're at home? Quite a lot. You know, what education did Sergey and Larry have before they went into Google? They were Montessori kids. You know, so we need to kind of line up a little people's behavior and their business practice and their technology practice. But I think it's really possible that if we come from a richly humane perspective, we can make great choices about teaching methods and technology and access to nature and getting covered in mud and being a little mammalian at the right time, so that you feel so sure and confident in the physical world that you're able to make grounded decisions in the right way when it comes to that point in your later adulthood and your later development. You know, it's a fantastic challenge as a pedagogical and a methodological challenge. It's absolutely fantastic, and I certainly find myself swamped in great precedent and swamped in great research as to how we might build a play-centric pedagogy and educational system and social and spaces in society that can support that. There's lots and lots of room for innovation here, definitely.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Pat.